Welcome to Puro Politics, the political podcast of the San Antonio Express News. My name is Gilbert Garcia, Metro columnist, and I'm joined by
Kerry Clark, columnist, editorial board.
Metro editor Greg Jefferson.
Molly Smith, City Hall reporter.
Molly. This is your first time on the podcast. Thank you so much for being with us. We really appreciate it.
Of course. Thanks for having me.
And we're going to be concentrating on some things that you've been covering lately. And I wanted to start with the Reproductive Justice Fund. I think a lot of San Antonians have heard about this, but the story took a turn last week when we had several groups filing a lawsuit in state district court against the fund and against the city over the fund. And we'll get into the substance of what this Reproductive Justice Fund is about, but I wanted to start by looking at the process because it was an unusual situation. City Council found out, I think, late in the game, before they were going to vote on the budget in September, that there was this big CPS Energy windfall. What happened exactly?
Yeah, so council learned about 4 days before they were going to pass the budget that they had $20 million extra dollars to work with. And the Reproductive Justice Fund was something that a couple community groups and organizations had been lobbying council members for. So it had broad support on the council. And then when council started discussing it, it came out that some members maybe wanted it to be used to support abortion funds, which are groups that provide financial support for Texans who are seeking an abortion in a state where it's legal. And so it was somewhat contentious, but there was overall very broad support. So it ended up passing. They allocated $500,000, so a small portion of that $20 million. And they simply said, we'll decide at a later date how we're actually going to use this fund. We'll just set aside the money for now.
Which is it seems like an unusual, and Greg, you've been covering city government for a long time. The leaving it open, because I heard when the lawsuit was filed last week, I heard City Attorney Andy Segovia saying, well, he was basically saying this is this is a ridiculous lawsuit, and that they're gonna have some kind of session at some point where they're gonna determine a work session.
Yeah. But it is weird that City Council sets aside the money in the budget without actually talking about the parameters of this fund. And I think that's because, all of this came up in a really short period of time. At the end of every budget cycle, it gets really contentious. You've got every council member with pet projects and different spending priorities trying to get as much of that windfall funding, which comes up a lot in most budget cycles, we have extra CPS money at the end. So council members are fighting over that. I think, maybe there were 2 or 3 council members who very much wanted the Reproductive Justice Fund, but I think it was the support for it was a little more tepid, maybe among other council members, and they just didn't want to get into an abortion fight, in the run up to passing the budget. So they kind of punted and said, "Okay, we'll work out the details later."
In looking at this historically, before Roe v. Wade, the Supreme Court decision in January of '73. You had very few states that had legalized abortion, and it was common for organizations to provide funding for women to go to New York or California or Colorado, the few states where they could do that legally. And there was an organization, and I remember looking into this last year when Roe v. Wade was overturned. There was an organization in Houston that would provide package deals for women that would include travel and lodging and so on, and abortion services in California or other states. And I think they were saying that there was 6,000 women a year that were getting legal abortion outside of Texas through this fund. So there's that history. What seems unusual, at least from my perspective, and maybe I'm wrong about this, is when you have city government or any government bringing taxpayer money into it. I think that's is there a precedent that you're aware of? Because
the city of Austin.
City of Austin.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right.
Okay. Yeah.
In 2019, they did. I'm trying to remember what every session of the state legislature up to this point had been, there was going to be some provision curtailing abortion rights. Can't remember what it was in 2019, but it was city council in Austin responding to that. They did set up a similar fund.
And then Roe v. Wade was the law of the land at that point anyway.
How was the $500,000 decided upon, that figure?
It was a figure that was proposed by the council members who submitted kind of budget, they called the budget amendment requests. So I know Terry Castillo was one of the main council members behind it. So I think that was just a kind of a amount that they came to that they thought they'd have support for. You know, it's pretty small, so it wasn't going to take away from other people's projects. So there wasn't a lot of debate about the actual dollar amount.
The amount was pretty was small. And so you mentioned Terry Castillo. Jalen McKee Rodriguez, I know, is very open about the fact that he would like this, at least some of this funding to go to provide services or for people who want to seek abortions outside of Texas. It seems as though Ron Nirenberg, I mean, he's always careful about how he phrases things, but my sense is that he also supports that. Is that your sense about this?
It's really hard to say.
Yeah.
I think council members were really careful when they were actually adopting the budget to wade into whether they wanted it to support abortion funds or not. There were only really, I think, two up in the dais who were really clear about it, Terry and Jalen. Zikor told us after the fact that she did support that. But most people kind of kept their comments to wanting to support like reproductive health education, menstrual products, diapers, a broader kind of range that I think they think is kind of more palatable to voters. So I'm not really sure when it comes to a vote where they actually would fall.
Yeah, and it's worth noting that, we know that District 10's Mark White is adamantly opposed to
he abstained.
the fund.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, it meant enough to him that he abstained from voting on the entire budget, which included a lot of his spending priorities.
Pretty unusual.
But beyond him, you have to keep in mind that John Courage in District 9, who has said he's running for mayor in the next election, he said, I do not want any of this funding to go to abortion-related travel at all. And that could be, John Courage, he's an old Democrat. He used to be considered a liberal. Yeah. And in this case, it could be, he's thinking about running a citywide race. He's looking at where the votes are. Those are going to be, as they often are, concentrated on the north side, which tends to be a bit more socially conservative.
Well, I was going to say that it speaks to the ambiguity of the fund and the number chosen, but also you can't. This doesn't come down to a pro-choice, anti-choice vote. If you look at the council, you would look at the council. I would suspect that most of them are pro-choice and in broad support of something like this. But because it's so problematic for it to be coming out of city funds, what makes it more uncomfortable.
Yeah, right. And I mean, we haven't gotten to the lawsuit yet, but So Texas Right to Life and the San Antonio Family Association. Those are two of the kind of marquee plaintiffs in this case, but there were several dozen others. What's interesting about the lawsuit is the fund's not actually the money is set aside, as we've discussed. The rules aren't, there are no rules on how this thing is going to be used yet. So they're trying to stop a service that the fund provides that it doesn't yet provide. So I'm not sure what the basis of the lawsuit is. And I wouldn't be surprised if this got, kicked out of court on summary judgment just because, there's nothing at this point.
I guess the question I have is if the city is the council is going to decide at some point soon. And I get ultimately this is going to be a Metro Health issue, but the council's they're going to have to make determinations about the specifics of this plan. And at that point, does that change things?
Yeah. If, and it could, and how would this lawsuit shape that debate? And do we know when that work session is going to be?
No, the city it will not provide a date. So we've heard mixed things. We sometimes thought it was going to be this fall. Mark White thought it was going to be in the spring. So we really have no idea when they're going to discuss it. And I would think that because of this lawsuit, it's probably going to be pushed back.
There's a lot of it's a lot of vague sort of stuff happening with this. But I I mean, I don't know if any of us are legal experts, but when I look at, what they're I think asserting in this lawsuit is that this, if this is going to be used for abortion services, that it's in some way in violation of the 2021 law passed in the state of Texas, which allowed people to file suit to anyone who was assisting someone in getting an abortion. And I find myself thinking about that and wondering, because if you look at the language in the bill, I don't know that it really applies exactly to this. That's probably
could come down to a judge and their interpretation.
I don't. What's your sense about that, Molly?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting test, and we haven't had too many tests in court of SB 8. I think the only one, at least that I know of locally, happened last year when a Chicago resident sued a San Antonio doctor who wrote an op-ed in the Washington Post about how he had intentionally violated the law. And a local judge here ruled that the Chicago resident didn't have standing because he personally he didn't know the person who had the abortion and wasn't kind of impacted by it personally. So that's kind of one kind of precedent we have locally. But we haven't really had this test of unused money. And so I think it is a big question mark if it will even stand up in court.
You've got a fund with no rules attached to it at this point. So there are no abortion-related travel services, and there are no women, no specific, people who have sought abortion out of state with the benefit of these funds. So it's all it's extremely gray right now.
Yeah. And one thing that's interesting to me is that putting aside the issue of taxpayer money and this is being a city issue, is that, pre-Roe v. Wade, I don't think you had the intensity from the anti-choice forces when it came to trying to block people from traveling out of state. And that seems to be a part of what we've seen since Roe v. Wade was repealed. That now that they're actually saying we're going to try to stop that from happening. Whereas before it was kind of understood, the people who didn't want it in their own state sort of looked the other way when it came to people traveling out of state.
Right.
Yeah. I wanted to move on. Greg, you mentioned John Courage and his interest in running for mayor, and Molly, you had a piece a couple of weeks ago.
So many people running for mayor, right?
Yes.
And so many. You have no
I was going to make an announcement actually before the show.
Yeah, I was going to
remember you were running for mayor.
But we all know that if Victor Wembanyama decides at the at the last minute to get in, it's pretty much over. It's over. It's he's a little young, but I think he's got a good head on his shoulders. And the thing is that it's amazing that we're talking about this early, but it makes sense because we have not had an open seat since 2009 when Julian won.
Yeah.
And I really think that wasn't even a typical open seat because he was such a front runner. We knew that he was probably good.
Trish DeBerry, who ran against him, would probably disagree.
She got in late, she made made it competitive, but he was such an overwhelming front runner that year. And so we're really going back to something like 2005 when Hartberger ran against Castro. And when we had, that was really
that was
a free for all.
That was a great campaign.
And so in this case, we're getting into a situation where, first I want to talk about who looks likely, who looks possible. We'll start with current members of city council. Who's looking at it?
So there's 4. John Courage is the only one who said he's running as of now. Manny Pelaez, we're kind of waiting for him to announce. He, a couple weeks after being sworn into his 4th and final term, sent out this kind of email that very much hinted at the fact that he was going to run. He says he's still in exploration mode, but it's a wait. It's going to happen with him. Melissa Cabello Haverda, she says she intends to run. She's trying to be very careful. She's afraid that she might. She's afraid that it's going to be too early to announce, doesn't want to get in trouble with these resign to run laws, which don't apply here. So if you're a council member, you can announce at any point that you want to run. But we've seen her kind of positioning herself policy-wise to kind of make an announcement. And then a question mark on council is Adriana Rocha Garcia. She said she's considering it, but of the 4, she's also the only one who said, if there was another strong person outside of city council, I would be willing to possibly lend my support to them. So a kind of a question mark on depending who else runs, whether she'll actually do it.
It's also an indictment against her colleagues, isn't it?
It sounds like it could be, yeah. And so you've got, I guess what I'm wondering is, do you sense it has to be a little awkward when you've got 3 or 4 current members of council already kind of jockeying for position in the next mayoral race? What's the vibe like between? I don't get to use the word vibe in the podcast often, so I thought I would just.
We actually discourage it.
I know it really had no place in the podcast, but I just thought I was going to throw it in there because it'll see my only chance.
Well, this is you live and breathe this, so
Yeah,
I
think
the vibe?
You can see it in terms of they're really trying to start getting policy wins that they can promote on the campaign trail. So Melissa made looking at the CPS surplus a really big thing. Didn't really get where she wanted to get on that.
I couldn't read that story without reading it through the lens of
Right.
of
Well, I mean,
race.
yeah. Well, she's this is her final term, and it's the first time she is now talking about reducing the amount of revenue that CPS Energy has to give to the city to 10%. Right now, the utility has to give 14% of its revenue to the city every year. She's talking about reducing that to 10%, which sounds great. I mean, ratepayers might react well to that, and this is a new proposal, and it's a kind of thing. It sounds like it's a small percentage, but it's quite a bit of money.
Oh yeah.
And this is the kind of thing that council members, would take a couple of terms.
What are we talking? I mean, just off the top of my head, I'm thinking maybe 100 million, 100, something like that, maybe more than that.
They said, it's so 14% now. If you dropped it to 11, that'd be a loss of $90 million. The city CFO says annually.
Yeah. And I mean, CPS revenue makes up about a quarter of the city's general fund. So it's a huge source of money for basic services like police and fire, sidewalks, senior centers. So it's a big deal when you're talking about jimmying with that formula. It's a lot. So it is hard to look at something, a policy proposal that big and not think about the person who's delivering it.
Yeah.
And their kind of aspirations to be mayor.
Was there one name, Molly, that you, when just in doing the story, reporting the story, that you heard more often, like someone who isn't on the council now, just one name?
One that surprised me, and we haven't been able to confirm this with them, but was Gina Ortiz-Jones. Heard her name repeatedly from people who had said they had heard it or they had met her and she had mentioned it. She didn't respond to kind of our email inquiring whether she's considering it, but that did kind of surprise me.
Me too.
A lot of people will know her from her 2 runs for the 23rd district in Congress. But that's kind of a really different ball game than City Hall. I mean, you're dealing with totally different issues.
That's right. And she's been Undersecretary of the Air Force for a couple of years in the Biden administration, and she resigned a few months ago. But she hasn't really been a presence in local government. I mean, as far as I can tell. So
None that I can.
I mean, she's she's obviously, a lot of people know her,
right.
And she probably has some good sources of funds. But
and Ray Saldana didn't get back what you did.
No, he's he's interesting because he's never made any bones about wanting it. I mean, I did a story on him right after he'd left council, but before he became chief executive officer of Communities and Schools, which is a great kind of national program. He was supposed to move to the DC area because that's where it's headquartered. The pandemic hit and he was working remotely. He's still living here. And his name has been, kind of in circulation over the last couple of months. The question is, just because he has been so forthcoming about, his desire to at some point run for mayor, is he actually talking with people about doing so? We haven't found anybody who's directly talked to him, but he's kind of in the air.
Yeah.
It's like a possibility, but we don't know if that means he's actually contemplating it or if it's just chatter.
And it's interesting because it really raises the question of whether his work with communities and schools has just changed his perspective. Because you're right. I mean, he was very open about the fact that he wanted to be mayor. He was just kind of waiting for his time. If he decides to sit this one out, there's the possibility there'd be another 8 years before there'd be a real serious opportunity again. So this might be.
And he's someone who we always, when he was on council, I think everyone just assumed he would be mayor.
Yeah, I mean that's the thing.
Yeah, that's right.
He's so much in the mold of Julian and Joaquin Castro. I mean, same kind of upbringing.
Stanford,
some different. Yeah. Stanford, yeah. I mean, it becomes a little, a little more lockstep.
Got elected in his mid-20s.
Oh yeah, high school star. Went to an Ivy League school, elected early, and So I think given kind of his story arc, it's like I think everybody just kind of assumed that's the way it was going to be. But I mean, because he's not talking to us, we don't know if that story's changed at all.
Yeah. Another one that was really interesting, and which I heard also was Diego Bernal, the state representative, and this kind of gets to a kind of an interesting mini trend that we've seen over the past couple of years, which is Democrats, I should specify, Democrats going to Austin, getting very frustrated by serving in the state legislature in a Republican-controlled state government, and deciding, I think I want to go back to San Antonio. We saw this with Ina Mijares. We saw this with Justin Rodriguez.
Letitia.
And that's right. And so I don't know if Diego's going to run or not, but
tells you how bad it is in Austin. To come to a weak mayor, strong manager form of government is a way of doing something.
But I mean, that feeling of just, I'm one of 150 people and we get very little passed.
And
so at least
you actually do have some powers.
Yeah.
You can actually do stuff.
Yeah. So, I mean, what's your sense about his interest?
I mean, right now he said he doesn't want to say, and all he'll say is he's waiting to see what the ideas are. And he's looking for ideas beyond those that you typically hear in the race.
I think whether he's seriously considering it or not, I think he's an extremely cautious politician, and that's going to hurt him in a citywide campaign and maybe in the office itself. He just seems like he's constantly he doesn't want to make the wrong move. Like he's just very, very careful. So it's like you need to embrace uncertainty and risk in a citywide race and as mayor.
Well, it's going to be for anybody who runs. I mean, this is a really risky political move to make, because I don't see anybody, and I was curious how you see it, Molly. Like, I could see any number of these potential candidates in the mayor's office, but I don't see like a clear front runner right now. Do you? And it's really early, I know. But.
I think it's early. I mean, the name we hear a lot is Manny Pelaez, but I think there's also room for other people to come in. I think what we hear a lot is that there's an appetite for an outsider, for maybe a different approach, and for some kind of outside candidate to come in. So I think it really depends if there are those people who haven't really made it public.
The Hardburger type candidate.
Who kind of come in and offer voters just like a really strong alternative and something different.
We've heard a lot about the business community. What did the executives want? Who are they scouting for? And we really don't know. I mean, there doesn't seem to they don't seem to be the chamber types don't seem to be championing any particular.
Well, former councilman Richard Perez, who was with the chamber as I mean, he's considering it. But I don't know if he'd be somebody.
I just don't know that he would have. I mean, he led the chamber for over a decade. He didn't get great marks in his performance running it. It was kind of, in a way, it's unfair. Criticism of him, I mean, is unfair because the influence of chambers across the country has been in decline for a lot of reasons. And I think he definitely had his supporters, or he wouldn't have lasted as long as he did in that role. But I mean, I just don't know how much broad support he has among business executives in San Antonio. I do know that there's still there's still a lot of discussion. And like I said, there doesn't seem to be at this point like any kind of real consensus candidate. I'm told that Gordon Hartman, who, he's former
name's come up
developer, philanthropist, he's kind of the force behind Morgan's Wonderland. He always comes up every cycle. Not so much this time. I'm told he's not really seriously looking at it. It's kind of a weird, weird race as it's shaping up in that respect. Like no clear biz candidate.
Yeah. Well, before we wrap things up, I wanted to talk about another story you wrote recently, Molly, and we don't know a lot about it probably, but I couldn't resist asking you. Last week, the council approved a $1.2 million contract with Cotton Commercial USA for mold remediation services at the Alamodome. So what's going on? What's happening?
It's moldy. That's what's going on. Okay. It grew mold. Yeah.
Well, the city and the Alamodome don't really want to talk about this, but we know that there's mold in the upper concourse stairs on the 5th level. They said that there were some water leaks. The sealant was just kind of faulty, and so water was getting in. They noticed some yellowing around the ceiling, realized there was water damage. They said there's about 3,300 square feet that is going to be removed and cleaned up. They said all we know right now is it doesn't pose a health risk and it should be cleaned up fairly fast. But they aren't saying too much about it.
My daughter had her graduation ceremony there a few months ago, so I guess we're okay though. It's been a while, enough time.
Well, yeah. Did it smell weird? Was it musty? Was it kind of musty?
It could have been like the food that people were eating around it. I don't know. So, but
it's like Son of Alamodome. It's the sequel.
Yeah. What was fun about that story was like did anybody you interviewed or any of the document, did any of them actually, other than mold remediation, which they had to include because that's what the contract. Did anybody say mold?
No.
My guess is like there might have been some marketing considerations. Alamodome mold.
Yes. We don't want those words together.
Right. Yeah.
If we can avoid it.
Yeah. Spores, maybe that would have been better. I don't know. Whatever.
Oh, gosh. Well, I hope everything works out with that. Molly, thank you so much for being with us. It was great having you on the podcast. And I want to encourage everyone who's listening in to be sure to read Molly's work in the Express News. I mean, she's really been doing some great work on what's happening in city government. So hope everyone's doing well out there.
Voting.
Oh, yes. Thank you for reminding me, Carrie. We want to encourage everyone to check out the 2023 voter guide in the Express News. You can go to our website and, it will be, I think, really helpful because, there's when we're looking at those propositions, I mean, we were dealing with that, Carrie, last week. And, it's hard to get information on that. A lot of times people, when they go to vote and they deal with these, it's hard to know. And the language sometimes doesn't,
deceptive.
It's a little deceptive. So anyway, go to the Express News website and read the 2023 voter guide. Hope everyone's doing great out there. We'll be back next week. And until then, take care.